What if I told you that Egypt had not one, but two periods of kings ruled by people with what we today would consider to be black African features? And furthermore, these were not some obscure rulers from the earliest days of ancient Egypt, but rather prominent and important pharaohs who were deified after their deaths, and whose images adorn some of the most famous monuments of the ancient world. The story of these forgotten pharaohs is one of conquest, assimilation, and cultural exchange. But it also reveals how the narrative of ancient Egypt has been hijacked by those seeking to deny Africa's rich history. So let's explore the Nubian pharaohs and ask why they've been erased from our collective memory. Now, before we start, please remember to give us your support. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going to be discussing the Nubia pharaohs. So let's start off by talking about who the Nubia pharaohs were. So the Nubian pharaohs were a group of rulers who came from the region of Nubia in present-day northern Sudan. They ruled over Egypt during two separate periods: the 25th dynasty from around 747 to 656 BC, and the 26th dynasty from around 664 to 330 BC. These dynasties are sometimes referred to as the Black Dynasties of Egypt because many of the Nubian pharaohs are depicted with dark skin. The Nubian pharaohs were Kushite by ethnicity, which is an ancient term for the people who lived in the region of Kush in present-day northern Sudan. Kush was located just south of Egypt along the Nile River and had been an independent kingdom for centuries before the new kingdom of Egypt began expanding its influence southward. Now let's talk about how the Nubian pharaohs came to rule over Egypt. The first Nubian dynasty to rule over Egypt was the 25th dynasty. The founder of this dynasty was Kashta, who was able to unite the northern and southern parts of Egypt under his rule. Following Kashta's death, his son Pionki conquered Nubia and extended his empire as far south as the fourth cataract of the Nile. Pionki's successors continued to expand the empire, reaching as far south as the sixth cataract. However, the 25th dynasty came to an end when the Assyrian Empire invaded Egypt and established a puppet ruler on the throne. The 26th dynasty was founded by another Nubian king named Taharqa. Taharqa was able to drive out the Assyrians and reunite Egypt under Nubian rule. He and his successors ruled over a period of peace and prosperity, but eventually Egypt was conquered by the Persians. Okay, now that we've talked about how the Nubian pharaohs came to power, let's discuss why they've been forgotten. One reason for the erasure of the Nubian pharaohs from history is the rise of Eurocentric narratives in the 18th and 19th centuries. During this time period, there was a growing interest in ancient Egypt among European intellectuals. However, this interest was often accompanied by a sense of racial superiority. Many Europeans believed that ancient Egypt was the cradle of civilization and that the Egyptians were a white race. This belief was used to justify the colonization of Africa and the enslavement of Africans. As a result, the Nubian pharaohs, who were depicted with darker skin, were often ignored or dismissed as unimportant. Another reason for the obscurity of the Nubian pharaohs is the destruction of many ancient Egyptian monuments and records during the Arab conquest of the 7th century. The Arabs viewed ancient Egyptian religion as polytheistic and therefore heretical. As a result, many temples and tombs were destroyed and countless artifacts were lost or dispersed. This destruction was particularly severe in Nubia, where the majority of the 25th and 26th dynasty monuments are located. However, despite the efforts of those who sought to erase the Nubian pharaohs from history, there is abundant evidence of their rule throughout Egypt. Many temples and tombs have survived the test of time and provide valuable insights into the lives and accomplishments of these forgotten rulers. Alright, now that we've talked about why the Nubian pharaohs have been forgotten, let's move on to the great debate: were the ancient Egyptians truly black? This is a complex question that has been the subject of much debate among historians and archaeologists. There is no simple answer, and the evidence is often open to interpretation. However, there are some key facts that can shed light on this issue. The ancient Egyptians kept detailed records of their history, including the genealogy of their rulers. These records show that the Nubian pharaohs were part of a long line of Egyptian kings. In fact, the 25th and 26th dynasties are considered to be the legitimate heirs of the 20th dynasty, which had ruled over Egypt for nearly 2 centuries. This means that the Nubian pharaohs were not outsiders, but rather members of the same royal family as many of the most famous Egyptian rulers. Furthermore, the ancient Egyptians did not view themselves as black or white, but rather as Egyptians. It was only much later that racial categories were imposed on ancient populations by modern scholars. In fact, the ancient Egyptians were more likely to distinguish themselves based on geographical location, such as Upper Egypt or Lower Egypt, rather than skin color. Finally, the physical appearance of the ancient Egyptians is often exaggerated or distorted in popular culture. For example, many depictions of ancient Egyptian pharaohs show them with exaggeratedly long and narrow skulls, despite the fact that there is no evidence to support this. Similarly, the skin color of the ancient Egyptians is often depicted as either black or white, when in reality it would have varied greatly depending on factors such as geography and ancestry. In conclusion, the ancient Egyptians were a diverse group of people with a wide range of physical characteristics. While it is true that some Egyptian rulers had darker skin, it is inaccurate and misleading to portray them as black. By doing so, we ignore the rich complexity of ancient Egyptian history and culture. Instead, we should strive to understand ancient Egypt on its own terms, appreciating the diversity and complexity of its people and their achievements. The story of the Nubian pharaohs is an important one. Not only do they represent a significant period in ancient Egyptian history, but they also challenge Eurocentric narratives that have dominated the study of ancient civilizations. By exploring the lives and accomplishments of these forgotten rulers, we gain a deeper understanding of ancient Egypt and the rich tapestry of cultures that make up our world. But what do you think? Do you find the story of the Nubian pharaohs fascinating, or were you surprised to learn about their accomplishments? Let me know in the comments below. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us your support. It really helps us continue producing videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. And now for our final segment. Let us discuss how the Nubian pharaohs are often portrayed in popular culture, and the ways in which these portrayals perpetuate harmful stereotypes. One common stereotype is the idea that ancient Egypt was a monolithic civilization with a single culture and identity. This is problematic because it ignores the diversity of cultures that existed within ancient Egypt over the course of its long history. The Nubian pharaohs, with their distinct culture and traditions, are often left out of mainstream narratives about ancient Egypt, which typically focus on the Egyptian pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. Another stereotype is the idea that ancient Egypt was a static civilization that never changed or evolved. This stereotype is also problematic because it ignores the significant cultural and political changes that took place over the course of ancient Egyptian history. The Nubian pharaohs, with their unique customs and traditions, represent just one of many different periods in ancient Egyptian history. Moreover, the stereotype of ancient Egypt as a static civilization also ignores the influence of other cultures on ancient Egypt. The Nubian pharaohs, for example, were influenced by the cultures of the regions they conquered, including Nubia and Libya. This cultural exchange is an important part of the story of ancient Egypt and helps us understand the richness and complexity of this ancient civilization. By perpetuating these stereotypes, we do a disservice to the Nubian pharaohs and the legacy of ancient Egypt as a whole. We miss out on the opportunity to learn about the diversity and complexity of this ancient civilization and the many cultures that contributed to its richness. Now, let's talk about the unseen influence of Nubian heritage on ancient Egyptian culture. Nubia, located south of Egypt along the Nile River, had been an independent kingdom for centuries before being absorbed into the Egyptian Empire. The Nubians had their own language, customs, and traditions, as well as a rich artistic heritage. Despite their differences, the Nubians shared many similarities with the Egyptians, including their religion and their love of writing. As the Egyptians expanded southward, they came into contact with the Nubians, and the two cultures began to blend together. Nubian kings became pharaohs of Egypt, adopting the title and regalia of their new empire. However, they still maintained many of their Nubian customs and traditions. The influence of Nubia on ancient Egypt can be seen in a variety of areas, including art, architecture, and religion. Nubian artists were skilled in working with gold and ivory, and their influence can be seen in the intricate jewelry and decorative items found in Egyptian tombs. Nubian architecture, with its distinctive use of mud brick and wood, also left its mark on ancient Egypt. Nubian religious beliefs and practices also made their way into mainstream Egyptian culture. For example, the Egyptians adopted the worship of several Nubian gods, including Isis and Osiris. The fusion of Egyptian and Nubian cultures resulted in a unique and vibrant civilization that was home to some of the most famous pharaohs in history. The Nubian heritage of these pharaohs is often overlooked, but it played a significant role in shaping ancient Egypt and its legacy. Now let's talk about decoding DNA and what modern science reveals about the ancestry of ancient Egyptians. Recent DNA analysis of ancient Egyptian remains has provided some fascinating insights into the genetic makeup of ancient Egyptians. Studies have shown that ancient Egyptians were genetically distinct from modern Egyptians, and that their ancestry can be traced back to a variety of different populations. One study published in 2020 analyzed the genome of a pharaoh from the 18th dynasty, which ruled over Egypt from 1543 to 1290 BC. The results showed that the pharaoh had a genetic lineage that can be traced back to a Neolithic farmer from what is now the Lovat region. Another study published in 2021 analyzed the DNA of several individuals from the 26th dynasty, which ruled over Egypt from 664 to 330 BC. These individuals were of Nubian descent, and their DNA analysis revealed a genetic link to modern-day Sudanese populations. These findings suggest that ancient Egyptians were not a genetically homogeneous population, but rather a mixture of various groups from different regions. The genetic diversity of ancient Egypt is thought to reflect the numerous migrations and conquests that occurred throughout the country's history. It is important to note that DNA analysis of ancient Egyptians is still in its early stages, and there is much more to learn about the genetic makeup of this ancient civilization. However, the findings so far have provided valuable insights into the origins and ancestry of ancient Egyptians, and have challenged the notion that ancient Egypt was a static and unchanging civilization. Instead, the genetic evidence suggests that ancient Egypt was a dynamic and evolving society that was shaped by the interactions between different cultures and populations. The discovery of Nubian DNA in ancient Egyptian remains, for example, provides tangible evidence of the significant influence of Nubian culture on ancient Egypt. As more research is conducted, we can expect to learn even more about the complex and fascinating history of ancient Egypt and the people who called it home.